This video will introduce another crucial and most important historical piece of evidence, whose inclusion completely and totally changes how this issue must be seen from now on. So at the time in 1977, if the GBC did not base their decisions on what Srila Prabhupada had actually and truthfully, for a fact, had said in that meeting, then what did they have to base their decisions on? The GBC minutes and the July 9th letter were actually describing two completely different systems or ideas. The GBC minutes completely changed Srila Prabhupada's words. The GBC minutes wrongly states that Srila Prabhupada said he would soon select men who would initiate their own disciples. Here we go again, as the official GBC minutes again completely changed Srila Prabhupada's most important words. And those changed words totally changed what the GBC men thought Srila Prabhupada was saying. Those changed words further misled the GBC to totally misunderstand this entire issue. They based this only on the wrong and changed words given in those GBC minutes, which again is the only information that the GBC had access to in 1977 to make their decisions on what they thought, what system Srila Prabhupada wanted. What is wrong with you people, the members of the GBC? Do you lack even the intelligence of a small child? A small child can see this. Are you so blind that you can't see how these GBC minutes totally misled the GBC back in 1977? Jayam Vishnupad Paramahansa Paravagacha Acharya Jasta Saraswata Shishi Maharaj's Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki. This is Amayatma Das, and for those who don't know me, I am a disciple of Srila Prabhupada initiated in 1973. My main service when Srila Prabhupada was present was as an artist and then the computer and audiovisual engineer for the Doll Museum project, or what we called FATE Multimedia Exhibit Project. I have made this video specifically for the GBC members of ISKCON, both past and present. Well, it is made specifically for the GBC. I'm also putting this video up on my YouTube channel as it needs to be seen by all sincere followers of ISKCON's founder Acharya, His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada. I am humbly begging every member of the GBC to please grasp Srila Prabhupada's feet in your heart while you watch the entire video. Please, with every ounce of faith and devotion to Srila Prabhupada that you have, please consider the consequences this video uncovers. You may be yawning and thinking that this is all old news and nothing new, but I implore every GBC member to watch, because all the devotees who do watch will be shocked what this video reveals, and they will be looking to see your response. Yes, this video will be concerning both the May 28th meeting and the July 9th letter. However, unlike other arguments that focus on analyzing what was said during the actual May 28th meeting, this video will introduce another crucial and most important historical piece of evidence, whose inclusion, along with the analysis of it that I give here in this video, completely and totally changes how this issue must be seen from now on. What we will first focus on is the actual information that the GBC had in 1977, upon which they based their decisions on regarding what they thought Srila Prabhupada had said during that meeting and what system they thought he wanted. The information the GBC had used was surprisingly not the actual words that Srila Prabhupada spoke as his answers to their questions in that meeting. We will examine the information that the GBC did have in 1977 and analyze how it influenced their view of the July 9th letter and influenced them in making their decisions as to what they thought Srila Prabhupada had wanted. Then we will compare this information that the GBC based their decisions on with what Srila Prabhupada actually said on May 28th, and it will be as obvious as black and white that the GBC made monumentally egregious, wrong, bad decisions in 1977 based on the wrong information that they had. As we will clearly prove with hard historical evidence that the information the GBC had upon which they based their decisions was flawed and totally misrepresented Srila Prabhupada. I will start by reviewing the situation. On May 16th, Srila Prabhupada had announced he would be leaving us soon. Quickly, most all of the GBC members around the world came and assembled in Vrindavan. Srila Prabhupada requested them to meet and come up with questions they needed him to answer before he leaves. On the most far-reaching and important topic regarding initiations for after he departs, the GBC came up with only 2 questions. Why only 2 questions? I won't focus on that here in this video, but I have researched this issue in great depth. And I explain in detail in my book, Srila Prabhupada's System for Initiations, the definitive analysis, not only why just 2 questions, but I also point out the odd, peculiar nature of those 2 questions. For example, why was the GBC only asking what the procedures were for the initiations after he departs, and not asking the really big question as to who will be giving those initiations? Who will Srila Prabhupada choose as his successor? As I said, I detail all of this in my book, Srila Prabhupada's System for Initiations, the Definitive Analysis. Although Srila Prabhupada requested all the GBC members to meet and come up with their final questions to ask him, my research on this topic shows that only a small handful of GBC men actually met and came up with the list of questions. As mentioned, only 2 of their questions were on this most important issue. These questions were written down, and on the screen is a copy of the original handwritten questions. On May 28th, a small delegation of GBC members went into Srila Prabhupada's room to ask these questions. In the meeting, the pre-written questions were asked to Srila Prabhupada, along with additional discussions. And sometime after the entire meeting ended, one of the members in that meeting wrote up the official GBC minutes of the meeting. This meeting was tape recorded. However, it was recorded on a 5-inch reel-to-reel, 1/4-inch tape. As per normal procedures, no copies were made at the time in Vrindavan. Rather, sometime after the meeting, the tape was sent to the Bhaktivedanta tape ministry in Los Angeles. Because it was not a lecture or philosophical talk, but rather a managerial meeting, copies of the tape were not sent out on the tape ministry to the devotee community. And so the tape just sat on the shelf for years. Eventually, it went to the BBT archives, where eventually the BBT transcribed it into their library of works that they were archiving. This is most important to take note of, that none of the GBC members had either a tape copy or a transcript of the tape at the time in 1977, when they were determining what system for initiations His Divine Grace wanted them to implement for ISKCON after he departs. Most of the GBC members were not in the room and did not hear him speak directly, and for many years, none of them even heard the tape recording or read the transcripts of the meeting either to know what Srila Prabhupada had actually said in the meeting. So at the time in 1977, if the GBC did not base their decisions on what Srila Prabhupada had actually and truthfully, for a fact, had said in that meeting, then what did they have to base their decisions on? As I said, after the meeting, the entire meeting was over, one of the GBC members who was in the meeting was tasked with the duty to write down the official GBC minutes of that meeting. From my research on this, I am all but certain the person who wrote those meetings, those minute meetings, was Satsaru Prabhu. The official minutes were written down from memory of whoever it was who wrote them. That person wrote down what they could remember, what they thought Srila Prabhupada had given as his answers to their questions. Obviously, if that person misunderstood aspects of what Srila Prabhupada was really saying, then this would be reflected in what they wrote. I am taking this step by step so that you can really understand what had actually transpired and taken place in 1977. I want you to see and understand how this actually unfolded. Obviously, there were others in that meeting, and all those present have supported that what the GBC minutes stated was what they also thought was what Srila Prabhupada had said and what he wanted. So let me address that by explaining some of the details about this meeting. Again, only a small handful of GBC men attended the meeting. So those men had, only those men had the opportunity to hear what Srila Prabhupada said directly. But could they really hear what he said so clearly? Srila Prabhupada's health issues made him weak at this time. He was not speaking that loudly. On the full recording, Srila Prabhupada mentions how the microphone was so close to his mouth that at one point he complained the microphone was going into his mouth. Yet even with the microphone so close to his mouth, still there is so much background noise that at times from playing the recording, it is still difficult to hear what Srila Prabhupada is saying, even with the microphone so close. The point I want to make is that although there were a small handful of maybe 6 to 8 men there, obviously they were not as close as the microphone was to his mouth. Mostly only Satsvarup and Tamal Krishna were asking the questions and would have been right next to him. The others would be sitting some distance away, and since the tape recording reveals much background noise, it would have been nearly impossible for those sitting further away to really hear exactly what Srila Prabhupada was saying. So after the meeting, the GBC minutes were written down. Those minutes of that meeting were then signed off by 18 members of the GBC who were in Vrindavan at the time. Their signature in indicating that they formally accepted that the written minutes were, to their understanding, a faithful representation of what allegedly Srila Prabhupada had said and what he wanted. Please note that I am not insinuating that anything nefarious was taking place. I am not saying that there was any conspiracy, even by Tamal, Krishna, or Satsvarup, or anyone else. From my study of this issue, I am of the firm conviction these men simply got confused and just misunderstood what Srila Prabhupada was really saying. I do, however, also consider that these men had such a strong desire to want to themselves become guru, that strong desire is what clouded their understanding, such that they only heard what they really wanted to hear. I also conclude that the person who wrote the official minutes of the meeting was not trying to purposefully mislead anyone. He was aware that the meeting was also being recorded. My conclusion is these men were sincere, but they were simply sincerely wrong in what they thought Srila Prabhupada was saying. I have mentioned all this so that no misunderstanding it will be made regarding the points I am making here. So back to the historical account. What we will do now in this video is we will totally ignore the actual May 28th transcript of what was actually said. We will do this because at the time the GBC made their decisions on this matter, and for many years thereafter, the GBC members themselves did not have access to that recording. For this reason, going forward in our analysis, we'll only use the same information that the GBC members themselves had at the time upon which they reached their conclusions and decisions regarding this issue. Along with, or possibly part of the GBC minutes, they also had the pre-written questions that were to have been asked of Srila Prabhupada. And the minutes supposedly were Srila Prabhupada's response to those questions. On the screen are the 2 pre-written questions that the members of the GBC were shown that were allegedly asked of Srila Prabhupada on this issue. Note that for the first question, Satsvarup totally reworded the question when he asked it, but his totally reworded version is basically the same, is asking the same thing, but just using different words. The written version is asking, what is the procedure for initiations when Srila Prabhupada is no longer with us? And the changed word, he changed it to, how are these initiations to be conducted? What are the procedures and how to conduct are basically the same thing. And to be noted, that when Satsvarup went to ask the second pre-written question, Srila Prabhupada interrupted him after Satsvarup only started to ask. My conclusion is that Srila Prabhupada interrupted him due to the poor wording of the question, and such that Srila Prabhupada assumed Satsvarup was asking something, actually different. So the entire question, number 2, was, as it was written here, was never actually asked. However, none of this was explained in the GBC minutes, and therefore none of the other GBC men were aware of these things. For the majority of the GBC, they assumed that the 2 pre-written questions were asked in full and that these were the only 2 questions that were asked on the topic. So finally, here is what the GBC minutes state as to what Srila Prabhupada's response allegedly was to those questions on this issue. Srila Prabhupada said, he will appoint several devotees who shall perform initiation in the future, even after his disappearance. The disciples they accept will be their disciples, and Srila Prabhupada will be their grand spiritual master. Just one short paragraph. Thus, the actual information that the GBC had at that time to make their decisions on this most important and far-reaching topic was just this one single paragraph that allegedly represented what Srila Prabhupada had said and wanted. Even though in these GBC minutes, it doesn't use the terms regular guru or diksha guru or successor or acharya. However, eventually this is how the GBC came to understand what they thought Srila Prabhupada wanted based on the GBC minutes saying that the men he will soon name will initiate their own disciples. And this was it. This was all that the GBC members had at the time in 1977 regarding any official documentation of what they thought Srila Prabhupada said and what he wanted for initiations after he departs. Even though the minutes state that after Srila Prabhupada's disappearance, he will initiate their own disciples, there was no instructions, there were no instructions or guidance given in those minutes as to how the spiritual masters were to interface with the GBC, etc. Were they to replace Srila Prabhupada as ISKCON's guru, meaning should these men now occupy Srila Prabhupada's Vyasasans? Or were there new Vyasasans to be made for them? Were the devotees now to offer Guru Puja in the temple just to these new gurus? Or was Srila Prabhupada's Guru Puja still to be performed? There were hundreds of more details that would need to be worked out. Yet this was just a very sparse, bare-bones idea that Srila Prabhupada would select some devotees who would initiate their own disciples after he departs. That was it. No details provided as to how this was to be carried out, even if that was what Srila Prabhupada had said. However, based on these GBC minutes, the only thing that the GBC men were anticipating or looking forward to after this meeting was that soon Srila Prabhupada will give the names of those who will initiate their own disciples, which basically was understood that these men would become Srila Prabhupada's successor gurus after he departs. 5.5 weeks later, Srila Prabhupada dictates a letter to his secretary, Tamal Krishna, in which he gives a list of 11 selected men. However, in that letter, Srila Prabhupada only selected them as his Rtvik representatives who would perform the physical aspects of the initiation on his behalf. Very clearly, the letter states that those who were initiated by these 11 named Ritviks will be Srila Prabhupada's direct disciples. Since the GBC minutes state that Srila Prabhupada would soon name men who would initiate their own disciples, it appears right away that the GBC men did not think that the 11 Ritviks were the men that the GBC minutes said Srila Prabhupada would select. "12 days after the letter is signed, Rameshwar sends copies of the July 9th letter along with the cover letter to all the members of the GBC, including to the men listed in the letter. And in this cover letter, Rameshwar only refers to these 11 men as being chosen to act as Ritviks and perform initiations on behalf of Srila Prabhupada. He mentions nothing about these men ever initiating their own disciples or becoming actual gurus. So it appears at first that this was the only understanding by the GBC members of what the selected 11 men were to be his Rtvik representatives, and that was all. But at some point in time, after Rameshwar sent the letter out to the GBC men, which may have been later that same day or the next day or a month later, the GBC reached a different understanding. It took them some days or even weeks, but eventually some of the members of the GBC started to put 1 + 1 together and came up with the conclusion that this list of 11 Ritviks was actually the same men that the official GBC minutes stated that His Divine Grace would soon name, that according to those minutes, these men were to initiate their own disciples after Srila Prabhupada's disappearance. Thus, the GBC men came to accept that the men listed in the July 9th letter weren't just to be Ritviks like the letter states, but they were actually the men that the GBC minutes stated Srila Prabhupada would soon name, who were to also become the next gurus after Srila Prabhupada departs. Their conclusion was reached despite the fact that the letter that Srila Prabhupada dictated and signed doesn't state this at all. In the letter, Srila Prabhupada says absolutely nothing that these men were to initiate their own disciples, ever, either after his disappearance or at any other time. Also, the letter didn't state that the Ritvik system was for only while Srila Prabhupada was present. On the other hand, the GBC minutes didn't mention anything at all about Srila Prabhupada appointing Ritviks or setting up a Ritvik system as the process for while he was still present or at any other time. In reality, it appears that the GBC minutes and the July 9th letter were actually describing two completely different systems or ideas. In the GBC minutes, it says Srila Prabhupada will soon select men who will initiate their own disciples after Prabhupada's disappearance. And in the July 9th letter, where Srila Prabhupada actually selected 11 men, he only selected them as Ritviks to initiate on his behalf. These were totally different systems. So which system did Srila Prabhupada really want? Rather than the GBC members going to Srila Prabhupada and asking him to clarify what he really wanted, instead the GBC men decided to figure it out on their own, what Srila Prabhupada might have, maybe, or could have sort of wanted. They did this by deciding to force the two opposing systems into one system. They did this by deciding that the 11 named Ritviks were the one and the same men the GBC minutes stated that Srila Prabhupada said he would soon name. But since the GBC minutes said they were to initiate their own disciples after Srila Prabhupada departs, then the GBC concluded that the Ritvik system could only be for while Srila Prabhupada was still present, and then after he departs, the same 11 selected Ritviks would become the next new acharyas for ISKCON and initiate their own disciples after Srila Prabhupada departs. That was the only way the two systems seemed to make sense to them. Yet the letter Srila Prabhupada signed did not state this at all. This idea was what the GBC members themselves on their own put together by combining what the GBC minutes stated and what the July 9th letter stated. But was this really what His Divine Grace actually wanted? Or did some of the men who were named Ritviks in that letter came up with this idea because it worked out best for what they wanted? Who knows? But the fact is, combining the two systems is not at all based on any direct or explicit instructions given by Srila Prabhupada, where he clearly stated this was what he wanted. In the letter, he never said anything at all about these 11 men initiating their own disciples. And he said nothing that the system described in that letter was only for while he was still present. Rather, in the letter, it states that this was to be the system in ISKCON henceforward. The GBC came up with this idea of meshing these two systems together, not based on any statement given directly by Srila Prabhupada, but they did so only based on their own mental speculation. Yet the GBC have claimed ever since, without being able to give any proof, that the system they put together was what Srila Prabhupada wanted. However, there was a problem. Well, actually, there was a whole fleet of truckload after truckload of increasing problems that would come along with this meshed up speculative idea that the GBC came up with. But going back to our timeline, the first main problem that at least some of the GBC members in 1977 saw was that the July 9th letter itself didn't say anything at all about these men initiating their own disciples or becoming actual gurus on Srila Prabhupada's disappearance or at any other time. And the letter stated nothing at all that the Rtvik system was to be only while Srila Prabhupada was present, living with us. Again, rather, the letter actually stated that the system would be, that this would be the system henceforward. Either all, or at least some of the GBC men, concluded that the letter Srila Prabhupada had dictated and signed would wind up confusing and misleading the rank and file devotees if they were to read the letter for themselves. The problem was that the GBC minutes, that gave one system. The July 9th letter gave a totally different system. And the GBC came up with a third meshed up system by forcing the two systems into one. But if the devotees read the letter, some of the GBC members feared that the devotees will not accept the GBC's idea that the men named, the 11 Ritviks named in the letter, were to be accepted as the next gurus in our disciplic line. It appears, if not for the whole GBC, at least the few who had control over the distribution of the July 9th letter decided it would be best for ISKCON, if not just best for them personally, for the GBC to keep this important letter secret and hidden from the rank and file members, because they concluded that the letter Srila Prabhupada wrote and signed was lacking, and it would actually mislead the general devotees, because in the letter Srila Prabhupada didn't mention that these same 11 men were to become gurus after he departs. What is most horribly unfortunate is that the GBC men of 1977 who made these decisions did not consider the possibility that it wasn't Srila Prabhupada's dictated and signed letter that was misleading or lacking, but that it appears that these men did not consider the possibility that it may have actually been the official GBC minutes of the meeting that they were basing their decisions on that may be what was actually flawed, and that they may have been the ones who had already been misled by it. Rather, in 1977 and onward, the GBC took the position that the GBC minutes, which was written down by one of the GBC men from his memory of what he thought Srila Prabhupada had said, were a perfectly accurate description of what Srila Prabhupada said and wanted, and that it was the letter that Srila Prabhupada had dictated and signed is what was potentially lacking and misleading. What I have given so far is an analysis of how the GBC reached their conclusions and decisions on this most important, far-reaching topic in 1977. We have shown what the limited information that the GBC men had at the time access to and used to reach the conclusions and make the decisions they made regarding this issue at the time, which became the foundation of their position on this issue ever since. Now we will examine whether the GBC minutes really was a faithful and accurate representation of what Srila Prabhupada had actually said, or was it really wrong and completely misleading, or some degree in between. To do this is simple because the actual meeting was recorded on tape, and so now we can refer to the actual recording and the transcript of it, and we can do a simple side-by-side comparison. As we can see, both the GBC minutes and the actual recording tell us that in response to the question regarding initiations for after Srila Prabhupada was no longer present, His Divine Grace did say that He would soon select some men. However, what He said He would soon select them to be or to act as, this is where the GBC minutes turn into a total train wreck and flies completely off the rails. What the GBC minutes state totally misrepresented what His Divine Grace actually had said. The GBC minutes totally changed the words Srila Prabhupada spoke, which totally changes the entire understanding. The GBC minutes state that Srila Prabhupada said he would soon select devotees who would initiate their own disciples. But what Srila Prabhupada actually said was that he would soon recommend some men to act as officiating acharyas. Okay, so what is an officiating acharya? Many devotees argue that since the word acharya is used, that Srila Prabhupada intended it to be some sort of guru, but that argument doesn't hold up. Immediately, Tamal asks if the officiating acharya is a Rtvik acharya. And Srila Prabhupada emphatically implied with Rtvik, yes. He doesn't say acharya, yes, but only Rtvik, yes. And this is Srila Prabhupada's own and one and only time that he defined what he meant by the term officiating acharya. He would soon select men to act as what he defined as Ritviks. For the record, a Ritvik is a Brahmin who performs Vedic yajna or fire yajnas on behalf of the yajnaman, or the one who asks for the yajna to be performed on his behalf. In regards to initiations, the Ritvik performs the ceremonial functions on behalf of the actual guru. In this way, the Ritvik does not initiate his own disciples. And as we see from the July 9th letter, this is exactly how Srila Prabhupada defines the Ritvik process and the functions of the men who act as his Ritvik representatives. And since the letter itself refers back to the meeting, and specifically to when His Divine Grace said he would soon select men to act as Ritviks, and in that he had originally used the term officiating acharya, which he then defined as Ritviks, by this we can understand that what the July 9th letter describes is proof that this is truly what he meant by the term officiating acharya and Ritviks, that they would be initiating on his behalf, performing the ceremonies, so that those who were initiated would be Srila Prabhupada's direct disciples. But the GBC minutes completely changed Srila Prabhupada's words. Srila Prabhupada said he would soon select men to act as what he defined as Ritviks, yet the GBC minutes wrongly states that Srila Prabhupada said he would soon select men who would initiate their own disciples. This is contradictory, as Ritviks do not initiate their own disciples. They only perform the ceremonies on behalf of the actual guru. Comparing what Srila Prabhupada actually said and what the GBC minutes claim he said, it is as clear as it can be that his words were totally changed. The GBC minutes stated that Srila Prabhupada would select the men to do one thing, and yet what he actually said is that the men he selects would do just the opposite. And then in July, when Srila Prabhupada selects 11 men, he selects them to do exactly what he said he would select them to do, to act as Ritviks, and not what the GBC minutes wrongly stated that he would select them to do, to initiate their own disciples. Thus, the GBC minutes was wrong, and it totally misled the GBC men in 1977. Please pay close attention and please open up your heart to the following. Considering how these changed words given in the GBC minutes influenced the GBC men in 1977 to view the July 9th letter and this issue all wrong. Again, the men that Srila Prabhupada actually said he would soon select or recommend would act as officiating acharyas, which he had defined himself to be Ritviks. And then in the July 9th letter, he selected 11 men to act exactly as that, Ritviks, no more, no less. Yet based on the changed words of the GBC minutes, which falsely and wrongly stated that Srila Prabhupada would soon select men who would initiate their own disciples after his disappearance, the GBC men reached the false and wrong decision that the 11 men Srila Prabhupada had only selected to act as Ritviks were supposed to initiate their own disciples and become the next gurus in ISKCON. That was not what Srila Prabhupada had actually said he would select them for in the May meeting, nor is it what he selected them to do when he gave their names in the July 9th letter. Yet the GBC men came to that wrong conclusion based entirely on the wrong and changed words given in the GBC minutes. Members of the GBC or their supporters may argue that just after this, Srila Prabhupada did speak about regular gurus who would initiate their own disciples. Yes, that is true, he did. But be honest about this. When Srila Prabhupada said he would soon recommend or select men, the GBC minutes wrongly stated that he would select men who would initiate their own disciples, and yet, in May, this is not what Srila Prabhupada actually said. He said he would select men to act as Ritviks. Please, just be honest with yourselves, and most importantly, be honest with Srila Prabhupada and with all of his followers, and simply admit that the GBC minutes were wrong and misleading. I am showing this here. It is obvious as it can get. Any child can see the GBC minutes had changed the words that Srila Prabhupada spoke. But what about the fact that Srila Prabhupada did, after this, speak about regular gurus? According to the GBC minutes, it states the men Srila Prabhupada would select would initiate their own disciples after his disappearance. Yet nowhere in the actual conversation did Srila Prabhupada ever speak of his disappearance, except that the first question the GBC asked him was in regards to after he has departed. And to that question, Srila Prabhupada said he would soon select men to act as what he defined as Ritviks. This was the only time that Srila Prabhupada refers to after he has departed. Separately, Srila Prabhupada speaks about how anyone would become an actual regular guru and accept their own disciples, as he said, on my order, be actually guru, but by my order. And again he said, when I order, you become guru, he becomes regular guru. That's all, the disciple of my disciple. Yet, here we go again, as the official GBC minutes again completely changed Srila Prabhupada's most important words in this context. And those changed words totally changed what the GBC men thought Srila Prabhupada was saying. Those changed words further misled the GBC to totally misunderstand this entire issue. The minutes stated that Srila Prabhupada said these men would initiate their own disciples, not after Srila Prabhupada gives his order, but rather after Srila Prabhupada's disappearance. This is an entirely different criteria. Three times Srila Prabhupada said, on my order, but by my order, when I order. 3 times Srila Prabhupada emphasizes that it will be on his order, but only by his order, that anyone would become an actual regular guru and initiate their own disciples. 3 times he said this, and yet the GBC minutes changed those most important keywords, changing on his order, but by his order, and when he orders, to after his disappearance. This gives an entirely different understanding. It changed the way the GBC understood or totally misunderstood what Srila Prabhupada had said and what he wanted. It was those changed words that became the basis for the GBC in 1977 to reach the conclusion that the Rtvik system given by Srila Prabhupada in the July 9th letter could only be for while Srila Prabhupada was still present with us, because according to the GBC minutes, the men he said he would soon name would initiate their own disciples, not after Srila Prabhupada gives his order, but only after his disappearance. Had the GBC minutes correctly stated that to become an actual guru, Srila Prabhupada's order must be given first, instead of saying after his disappearance, then the GBC would not have come up with the mentally speculated and concocted idea that the Rtvik system could not be for after he has departed. On the 28th of October in 1975, Srila Prabhupada clearly instructed that without such a direct order, no one can become guru.
A guru can become guru when he is ordered by his guru. That's all. Otherwise, nobody can become guru. A guru can become guru when he is ordered by his guru. That's all. Otherwise, nobody can become guru. Nobody can become guru.
Go back to the original question the GBC men asked. Their question was in regard to the process of initiations for after Srila Prabhupada was no longer with us. He was asked how those initiations were to be conducted. And to that question, Srila Prabhupada said he would soon recommend men to act as what he defined as Ritviks. Totally separate from this, Srila Prabhupada then explained how anyone could become an actual guru when he said that this would be by his order when he orders. That he said separately. But the person who wrote the GBC minutes got confused, and they mistakenly thought that Srila Prabhupada was saying that the person he would select to act as Ritviks would become the actual regular gurus. When? Not after he gives his order, but only after he departs. This was simply wrong. And the wrong GBC minutes influenced the GBC to make all wrong decisions about the Ritvik system and what system Srila Prabhupada really wanted. Even though the July 9th letter makes a clear reference to the May 28th meeting, to when Srila Prabhupada said he would soon select men to act as Ritviks, and Srila Prabhupada said this as his response to the initiations for after he has departed, because the GBC minutes stated that these men would initiate their own disciples after Srila Prabhupada's disappearance, the GBC tried to make sense of this and come up with a concocted idea that the Ritvik system could only be for while he was still present and could not be for after he departed. Again, they reached that decision not based on anything stated in the July 9th letter, and not really based on what Srila Prabhupada actually said in the May 28th meeting, but they based this only on the wrong and changed words given in those GBC minutes, which again is the only information that the GBC had access to in 1977 to make their decisions on what they thought, what system Srila Prabhupada wanted. I beg the members of the current GBC to please reassess this issue, to at the very least, be honest and admit that the only information the GBC had in 1977 regarding what they thought Srila Prabhupada had said and wanted on this most important issue was flawed and outright misleading. It changed the most important words that Srila Prabhupada actually spoke. It changed his message. Let's examine what the GBC minutes should have stated. That when asked about initiations for after Srila Prabhupada departs, after Srila Prabhupada settles up how he wants initiations to be conducted after he departs, then he will recommend some of the GBC men to act as officiating acharyas, which he defined as Ritviks. Srila Prabhupada then stated 3 times that his order must be given before one becomes an actual guru. That person he gives his order to become guru, he will become a regular guru and initiate his own disciples, Srila Prabhupada's grand disciples. This is what the official GBC minutes of the May 28th meeting should have stated, because that is what His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada actually said. Again, I am humbly begging the GBC members, both the current newer ones and especially those who were GBC back in 1977, please be honest with yourselves. And most all importantly, be honest with Srila Prabhupada and admit how this would have totally changed the way that you and the GBC men in 1977 would have seen the July 9th letter and this entire issue back in 1977. Had the GBC minutes been an accurate and faithful representation of what Srila Prabhupada actually said, then the GBC would not have been anticipating that the men Srila Prabhupada would select would initiate their own disciples, at least not right away, and especially not just after his disappearance. Instead, they would have been waiting for him to select men who would act as officiating acharyas, or as he had defined, as Ritviks. And that is what he did in the July 9th letter. No surprises. And because the GBC minutes should not have said he would be selecting men to initiate their own disciples, then the GBC would not have jumped to the totally wrong conclusion that the 11 men named as Ritviks were to automatically become gurus and initiate their own disciples. Thus, they would have respected the fact that Srila Prabhupada had only selected them to act as Ritviks, and that was all he had selected them to do. As far as anyone becoming an actual guru and taking their own disciples, the GBC would have understood that Srila Prabhupada must give his explicit order to that person first. It would not just be on his disappearance alone, but Srila Prabhupada's order must be explicitly given. With that understanding, the real and correct understanding, then the GBC would not have jumped to the wrong conclusion that the Ritvik system could only be while Srila Prabhupada was present, because the only reason they reached that conclusion in 1977 was due to the changed words, that they would initiate their own disciples on Srila Prabhupada's disappearance. He never said that. Instead, he said 3 times it would only be on his order when he orders. That person who he gives his order to, he will become a regular guru. Not on his disappearance only, but on his order. This should have been the understanding back in 1977, just after the May 28th meeting. Then 5.5 weeks later, when the July 9th letter comes out, the letter itself refers back to the May 28th meeting, and specifically to when Srila Prabhupada said he would soon recommend men to act as Ritviks, which was Srila Prabhupada's answer regarding initiations for when he was no longer with us. This should have made perfect sense to the GBC back in 1977 if the GBC minutes had accurately and faithfully stated what Srila Prabhupada had actually said. Had the minutes not changed what he actually said, it would have totally changed the decisions the GBC men made at that time regarding this issue. There would have been a clear understanding that it would not have been after Srila Prabhupada departs only that one becomes guru, but they would have known that Srila Prabhupada's direct order must be given first. But until then, the question that Srila Prabhupada was responding to was in regards to initiations for after he has departed. And Srila Prabhupada said he would soon select men to act as Ritviks. And that is exactly what he did with the July 9th letter. So that system was to remain in place for after he departs, up until he gives his actual order to someone to become the next actual guru. When I order you become guru, he becomes regular guru. That's all. Disciples of my disciple. Until then, the Ritvik system will continue, and Srila Prabhupada will remain the one and only Diksha guru for his ISKCON mission. Why can't the members of the GBC simply be honest with themselves and be honest with Srila Prabhupada and with all the followers of Srila Prabhupada? To start with, be honest about the GBC official minutes of the May 28th meeting. Just look at what those meeting minutes stated compared with the words that Srila Prabhupada actually said. Prabhujis, Matajis, please, I beg you, just put aside your biases regarding what you think about the Ritvik system after Srila Prabhupada was passed. Take that argument up separately. Please, for now, just focus on how these official minutes of the May 28th meeting were wrong and how they misled the GBC in 1977. Just focus on how those changed words had misled the GBC to make all wrong decisions on this issue. What is wrong with you people, the members of the GBC? Do you lack even the intelligence of a small child? A small child can see this. Are you so blind that you can't see how these GBC minutes totally misled the GBC back in 1977? Or are you so sentimentally attached that you can't accept that you and the GBC of 1977 was wrong about this? Why can't you bring yourselves to be honest about this? Do you not have any real humility? Just what in the hell is wrong with you people? The evidence I'm giving is here. It is as plain and as obvious as it can be. It is the real facts, and you cannot deny this. Before I end this video, I want to make one more related point. And that is that after Srila Prabhupada signed the July 9th letter, he verbally told Tamal Krishna that the GBC can add to this list. Obviously, anybody who reads that letter can see that the list of men, the men listed there, it is a list of Rtvik representatives, period. Yet again, because the GBC minutes wrongly stated that Srila Prabhupada would soon select men who would initiate their own disciples, and it said nothing about Srila Prabhupada soon selecting men who would act as Ritviks, this misled the GBC men to come to the conclusion that the 11 men listed by Srila Prabhupada as Ritviks in the July 9th letter were really going to become actual gurus who would initiate their own disciples, not after Srila Prabhupada gives his order, but after he departs. That we have made abundantly clear. However, because Srila Prabhupada had told that the GBC men can add to the list given in the July 9th letter, the GBC twisted and bent those words into claiming that Srila Prabhupada had actually authorized them, the GBC, to add not to a list of just Ritviks, as the letter actually states, but to add to a list of what the GBC now declared were gurus. What a total farce. What a con job. What a flimsy, non-existent claim. This is nothing less than twisting and bending of what Srila Prabhupada said, manipulating and reshaping of his words. And this became the sole basis for the GBC claiming that they have been authorized to ordain more and more Diksha Gurus. This is an outright offense. Actually, it is disgusting. There is no recorded verbal or written statement where Srila Prabhupada explicitly or clearly or even in a cloudy or fuzzy way authorized the GBC men to appoint or ordain Diksha Gurus. This is a major claim, to claim that Srila Prabhupada authorized the GBC to ordain Diksha Gurus. Srila Prabhupada clearly instructed that only one's guru can authorize one to become guru. Otherwise, he said, no one can become guru. This is from the 28th of October, 1975.
A guru can become guru when he is ordered by his guru. That's all. Otherwise, nobody can become guru. A guru can become guru when he is ordered by his guru. That's all. Otherwise, nobody can become guru. Nobody can become guru.
The idea that Srila Prabhupada would have authorized the GBC to do this, not even just on his behalf, but that he just turned over the whole process of authorizing new Diksha Gurus to them, to let them determine the criteria of how the disciplic line is to be carried out from now on, and yet the GBC claimed that Srila Prabhupada did this, not with an explicit instruction that can be proven, not in a way that it can be verified, that this is actually what he said or wanted, but they claim that Srila Prabhupada made this major change, which overruled his previous instructions, which changed the very way that disciplic succession is to be carried on forward in a very indirect way, with such a flimsy excuse of a so-called basis, which requires speculative imagination. And the real kicker is that the GBC came up with this claim 100% solely based on the changed words of the GBC minutes, because those minutes wrongly and falsely stated that Srila Prabhupada would soon select men who would initiate their own disciples, when what Srila Prabhupada actually said, what he would soon recommend men to act, is what he defined as Ritviks. The GBC of 1977 came to the misunderstanding that the Ritviks were to become gurus simply based on the changed and false words given in those GBC minutes. Because of that, the GBC saw that this list of Ritviks, they saw it as a list of gurus. And because Srila Prabhupada said they could add to that list, and the GBC bent and twisted that into claiming that Srila Prabhupada had authorized them to ordain or give their rubber stamp of approval of more and more so-called gurus in ISKCON. This is vehemently and totally apprehensible and unacceptable to us disciples of Srila Prabhupada who know the real basis and so-called foundation of those outlandish claims. Rightfully, we are upset about this. This is a major claim and a major change in Srila Prabhupada's teachings and a major change to how the disciplic line is to be carried out. And yet the GBC have made such outlandish and major changes on the basis of such flimsy, construed so-called evidence. There is no clear and explicit order given by His Divine Grace where He ever authorized the GBC to ordain Diksha Gurus. This is a complete and total travesty. On April 28, 1974, in a letter to Rupanuga Prabhu, Srila Prabhupada wrote regarding Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, his idea was Acharya was not to be nominated amongst the governing body. Letter to Rupanuga, 28th of April, 1974. This is what Srila Prabhupada taught in regards to the GBC ordaining gurus. He quoted his Guru Maharaj who opposed this idea. Srila Prabhupada never authorized the GBC to ordain, nominate, elect, select, approve, or in any other way authorize or regulate Diksha Gurus. This is a totally bogus idea, and it drastically changes the disciplic succession process. And on the 22nd of April, 1977, while speaking of future gurus, the following took place. Tamal Krishna, not rubber stamped. Prabhupada, then you'll not be effective. You can cheat, but it will not be effective. Just see our Gaudiya Math. Everyone wanted to become guru. Rubber stamping is the process by where someone or a committee, such as the governing body committee in ISKCON, proclaims that such and such is now a bona fide authorized guru because they say so, because they have given their rubber stamp of approval. The real fact is the entire multi-guru system that the GBC have forced ISKCON to follow is completely and totally baseless. It is devoid of any actual, direct, and clear instruction given by His Divine Grace. Srila Prabhupada never, ever said that the 11 men that he had selected as Ritviks were to initiate their own disciples or become Diksha Gurus. And Srila Prabhupada never authorized the GBC to ordain or rubber stamp any other Diksha Gurus. This totally changes the very foundation of the process of how the disciplic succession is to be carried out. Both aspects are totally baseless. Srila Prabhupada never authorized either thing. Both of these ideas came about because of the changed and misleading words of the GBC minutes of the May 28th meeting. This means that the entire guru system the GBC have set up and follows, that they have forced the members of ISKCON to follow, is nothing more than a total and complete baseless farce. Hare Krishna. As I conclude this video, I want to again ask the members of the GBC to be honest with Srila Prabhupada and put aside your biases and first admit that the minutes that the GBC men based all of their misunderstandings on were monumentally wrong and misleading, and that the GBC men in 1977 were horribly misled by those GBC minutes. At least take that first step. From the most holy Sri Vrindavan Dham, Jai Radhe Shyam, Jai Nitai, Jai Nimai, Jai Shiva Prabhupada. Thank you, aspiring to become a worthy and humble disciple and servant of His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada, and servant of all his followers, your servant, Amayatma Das.